Hey, I'm here to do a quick deck tech on Pioneer Phoenix. The first thing I want to talk about is actually the point of the deck. I feel one of the biggest misconceptions about the deck is people look at the card Arclight Phoenix and they start thinking the deck's really revolving around that. They start looking at like what your discard outlets are, how easily you can return them, and how consistent that is. But I think the point of the deck are really these delve spells. The Phoenix stuff is sort of incidental, and you're really just trying to get cards in your graveyard to take advantage of Treasure Cruise and especially Time Walk. And that is a much more accurate representation of what the deck is doing. That can make it a lot easier to understand. And obviously that will come up a lot when you're mulliganing, sideboarding, making in-game decisions, all those sort of things. But yeah, if this deck was called Blue-Red Delve, I think that would be a much more accurate name than Blue-Red Phoenix. The second thing I want to talk about is the number of lands in the deck. I don't know how widespread this belief is, but people seem to think the deck is really low on lands. I don't fully understand where that's coming from, because I think if you compare Phoenix to other decks, playing like 19 blue lands and like this many one-mana cantrips is not very low. But that's besides the point. A lot of people are concerned the deck is low on lands. And I could see playing a third Jwari, but that's another subject for later. The simple, I would say the deck has a lot of synergy with having a low amount of lands. And the simplest way I would describe it is that the deck really wants 3 land hands, but not 4 land hands. If you have like a 4 land hand and like 2 ops, it almost like it's unless your third card is like pieces, or maybe like you're basically almost always gonna mulligan. Maybe if you know the matchup and you have like a Ledger and you're like on the play against mono green, maybe you'll keep it because turn 2 Ledger is so good against mono green. But and I will say like a disclaimer, like it's different post board. If you're playing post board match and you're siding in counters so the extra lands are more valuable, your opponent has Go Blank, Croxa, whatever, then you're more likely. But I'm just talking about game one, like kind of in the dark. Hands that are like 4 lands and 2 ops will almost no matter what card is in your deck, unless it's literally pieces, maybe Picklock, it's going to be a mulligan. But you replace one of the lands and you add in with like almost any spell in the deck, and the hand gets a lot better. So basically, it's kind of like a weird thing to say, but hands that have 4 lands and opt tend to be kind of bad, but hands that have 3 lands and opt tend to be kind of good. So you have a lot of incentives to have low lands. You also have a lot of like really low impact cards you can't really play in the early game. So obviously the Delve spells, the Arclight Phoenix, there's like Forks, and even the burn spells are like pretty low impact, like they're just 1 mana spells. And so you have a lot of like cards in your opening hands that are hard to like use early game. I guess that wasn't the best way to put it, but you also have like all these 1 mana cantrips are kind of like not really a full spell. They're kind of like more like half a spell. And also with Arclight Phoenix, you really want to keep being able to cast 3 spells throughout the game to be able to return it. When you resolve your Treasure Cruise, you don't want to draw like 2 lands. And making more lands is even good for pieces, because it makes you have a higher chance to hit spells the less lands you play. So you can play an extra land if you want. I could see 20. But those are kind of the things I would say when people are concerned about low lands. Sometimes you're going to have 1 land hands, but like that's the cost of doing business. Like you don't win every game of Magic, and you have to make certain costs for things that are, better on the aggregate. Then I guess the third thing I wanted to talk about is Ledger Shredder. It almost pains me to say this, but there's been a community of no Ledger Shredder people. And I don't know if it's a cult or something, but I can kind of see their viewpoint. I'm not talking about the people who play Thing over Ledger. I don't know, I guess I'm saying a bit too much random stuff. I would say the downside, I'll say the downside and the upside of Ledger Shredder. I guess I'll start with the upside. Actually, I'll start with the downside because it's easier. The downside of Ledger Shredder is that you're playing a deck that has almost no targets for spot removal. So when you add Ledger Shredder to your deck, you're giving your opponent a target to use their removal on. You could kind of think of this like a deck like Lotus Field, like Storm decks like Legacy Storm. They're kind of trying to combo off. In this case, you're just trying to kind of cast Delve spells and giving your opponent a target for removal, you know, maybe that's not great or whatever. So that would be the downside. I would say the upside of Ledger Shredder, the first thing I would say is free wins. When you play a turn 2 Ledger Shredder in a lot of matchups, it can give you a free win. So I'm talking about matchups like Mono Green, like Gruul, you know, like Spirits. You know, Gruul has like sometimes some removal, usually not as much game 1 though. But anyway, these are just kind of matchups where when you play like a turn 2 Shredder, especially on the play, your win rate gets strong. I don't know how to say the word, like super high. And that's like the first reason you want Shredder, because like let's say you sit down for a tournament, you play against Gruul. You know, if you don't have Shredders, or I guess like just having Shredders is just going to give you like a lot of easier outs to winning those matchups. So the first thing, free wins. The second thing, I would say, it makes your deck function extremely well. Like I said, most of what you want to do is cast Delve spells, which isn't super easy to do. If you have a Shredder in play, all your Delve spells are going to be very cheap. Discarding Arclight's not that easy in this deck. If you have Shredder in play, it's very easy. When Shredder's in play, the deck is just so turbocharged. This is a deck that can kind of function a little bit sketchy. And when you have Ledger in play, your deck just operates like perfectly well. Like you just, it's like you're demonic tutoring every turn, but better than that almost. And sometimes, so those are some upsides, and it's not like that horrible against removal. Like that's a little bit of a complicated discussion, but you know, you can like try and get a connive trigger before it dies, or if they use a removal, maybe they have to spend a turn killing it instead of developing their board, and it's fueling Delve for your crews. So I'm like pretty pro Shredder, but I can understand not wanting to play it if you have some really intellectual visions. Talking about Thing in the Ice, comparing it to Thing in the Ice, I just don't really understand why you would want to play Thing in the Ice, because this deck already has a hard time functioning. It already has a hard time casting its Delve spells. It has a hard time discarding Arclight Phoenix. Like I said, when you have Shredder in play, you just start blasting the Delve spells. You start discarding Phoenix. Thing in the Ice doesn't really help with that. If you have Shredder Ledger in play for a bunch of turns, it's like pretty hard for your opponent to win. Like Thing in the Ice flips the board, but if you have Shredder in play, you're just discarding Phoenix and casting Delve spells. It all, I don't know. I really don't understand the appeal of playing Thing in the Ice. I think even in matchups people think Thing is better against, Ledger is actually better against. Like a matchup like Mono Green, I think you kind of win by, you know, you cast a couple you try and like win with Time Walk and counter spells. Thing in the Ice is not really helping you play Time Walk or counter spells. Maybe there's some like esoteric stuff, like if you're playing against like Heroic and they have like indestructible creatures or something. I don't know. The deck already has a hard time functioning, and Ledger just like instantly makes your deck function well. That's what I'd say about Ledger. I don't really think there's that many other creatures people play. Sometimes Young Pyro or stuff, but not worth talking about too much. I guess I can talk about Picklock a little bit. It's kind of a new and interesting card. I would say the upsides of I'll start with the downsides. The downsides of Picklock is it's not a great tempo play. You're spending 2 mana to mill 3 cards and get a spell back. You know, if you're playing against your opponent's casting creatures on the board, like you're playing against Gruul, it's, you know, a pretty easy way to fall behind, where because you cast this card, you're not getting a very good effect for your mana, so you're just falling behind. I would say the upsides of the card is that it's an instant, basically. Letting you play at instant speed can be really convenient, especially post board. Yeah, there's matchups where you want to hold up mana, so if you play against a deck like Greasefang, you'll notice that when you have pieces and like removal in hand, it can be kind of awkward, because if you tap out for pieces, they could kill you with Greasefang, but if you hold up removal, you might also fall behind, because they might play a Chariot, or maybe you're like missing lands, and next turn it's the same ordeal. So Picklock's like really convenient that it's an instant. It doesn't make you have to make those hard choices. And like when you side in counter spells, it can be nice. So I figured I'd try a couple. It also helps with the delve spells. I guess I'll touch briefly. Like some people consider cutting pieces for make more Picklocks. It's kind of an interesting debate. It always feels weird to cut pieces because, like I was saying, the whole point of the deck is casting these delve spells, and pieces is like very good at letting you do that. Downside of pieces is if you like really want to play at instant speed. But I also felt when I was playing Picklock, like paying 2 mana to only pick 1 card felt pretty bad. Whereas when you play pieces, being able to pick 2 cards, it felt like I was getting a lot more bang for my buck. I could talk about Jwari Disruption quickly because that's kind of a new card. The kind of reason to try Jwari was when Sleight of Hand came out, Spikefield Hazard got a little bit worse in theory. So I was looking at other stuff I could play. I really like the spell lands because it felt like it does come up a lot that you want to find those pieces, and also, like I was talking about, synergy with low lands. It's really nice when you can get more utility out of your lands to, you know, cast an extra spell or whatever. The reason to try Jwari, I am pretty optimistic about it because I feel like it's a card that can generate good situations for you pretty easily. So, like, if your opponent plays a 3-drop and you Jwari it, like if you counter a Fable or Graveyard Trespasser or whatever, you're just generating good positions for yourself. And I always, when I'm playing Magic, I'm always trying to look at how I can put myself in an advantage. So Jwari is a card that can easily put you in an advantage in a deck where, if you look at the deck, you don't have that many sort of interactions for those situations. Like you don't have a lot of ways to interact with your opponents, basically what I'm saying. Then, so yeah, and so it's just pretty appealing. Like the deck doesn't have that much space for tons of interaction. It obviously has a lot of burn, but I mean for like cards that are resilient to burn spells, like being able to counter Bank Buster or like Fires of Invention or something is really appealing. I'm not 100% sure if it's worth it, but I feel pretty good about it. I could see going to 3 also. And also another problem with this deck is it doesn't have a lot of 2-drops. You know, Phoenix wants you to cast 3 spells. So when you're casting your cantrips on turn 2, it can feel kind of bad sometimes if you have like a Lightning Axe and a Phoenix. You have pieces. The deck's always been kind of low on 2-drops, sort of. So Jwari's just kind of nice to give you a 2-drop to cast. So those are some things about Jwari. Let me see my notes. What else I had to talk about? I guess I can talk about Saheeli quickly. She's a card that I'm actually pretty low on. This is just the last list I played in a tournament. I think I played this in the showcase last week. The reason I put Saheeli was because I was kind of scared about decking myself, with people were playing like the End, which is like a removal spell that when it kills a creature, it exiles them all from your deck, like a Slaughter Games effect. So since I had 4 Drake and 4 Phoenix, I was like, people were telling me, like, I was kind of scared maybe I'll deck against Black Red mid range. I've already had issues against them where I'm pretty close to decking the way I play my deck. So I was like, okay, I'll try one Saheeli because, like, worst case, when I draw my deck, it'll be good so I don't deck myself. Whereas, like, I think Fable's, like, a lot probably better of a card, but Fable doesn't help with decking as much, at least if they use the End on your Drake or you milled all your Drakes or whatever. But I'm pretty low on Saheeli. It just doesn't seem like that good of a rate of a card for me, paying 3 mana to make tokens. I mean, my concern is kind of the ability to cast the spells. I'm a lot concerned about being able to just cast delve spells when I play a deck. Any card that doesn't really help me cast delve spells, I'm already much lower on because, again, all I really care about when I'm playing this deck is casting delve spells. Obviously, you could say, oh, it's good against Graveyard Hate or something, but, you know, there's cards that do both, like Ledger Drake and whatever. So I guess I have her because I was kind of worried about decking, but I don't even know how real of a concern that is. I guess I could talk about Crackling Drake quickly. And other Planeswalkers. I don't know, I wasn't sure if I should do that, but the reason to play Crackling Drake, and it was a card initially I was very low on, and I told people I would never play Drake, it's just too bad, but the reason to play it is when your opponent plays a card like Leyline of the Void or Rest in Peace, your deck doesn't really do anything anymore, it doesn't function. So I kind of wanted a sideboard card that when my opponent played Graveyard Hate, I could play towards something. There's obviously other options. I just felt the Planeswalkers were kind of hard to protect. When I would play against Black-Red mid-range, they were attacking the Planeswalkers a lot with vehicles, or it was just hard to clear the board or the creature lands. I also felt that the Planeswalkers could be kind of low impact sometimes, which sounds weird to say. But it's like you're using so much mana on cantrips, so having like Drake, which can have like a more immediate impact for its cost, can be nice, even though I guess if it dies to removal, it can be clunkier than a Planeswalker. But I just really like that it let me play towards a plan, and I was noticing against decks with like when I play against control decks, sometimes I like to wait until like turn 6, turn 7, and then I play Drake with a counterspell up, or I guess against those Fires of Invention Incarnation decks, like I would side in like 3 Drakes, and then you don't really want to play it at turn 4, you know, if you have better plays, but when it's like turn 8 and you play Drake with like, you know, like a negate into the Disdainful Stroke up, it felt really good that you was just untap and kill them in one hit. Whereas if you played like a Planeswalker, it was more like whatever. Though it depends which one. Like some Planeswalkers like Jace would be 4 mana. Jace Wielder of Mysteries would be good in that spot. But anyway, that's kind of why I have Drake. I don't love it against Black-Red mid-range though, even though it's just, so it's kind of like a weird thing because I don't love the Planeswalkers, but I also don't love Drake. I like that Drake was more versatile. Like if I play against like you can side in Drake in almost any matchup. So if you play against aggressive decks, like even like mono red, Gruul, whatever, you could side in Drake. But you know, some of the Planeswalkers can be a little bit more narrow in that way. Also, sometimes the control decks play like 4 Dovin's Vetoes, and it's nice that you can like protect your Drake with Dispute or whatever, whereas you can't protect the Planeswalkers with Dispute. That's a little bit about Drake. I guess I won't go too deep into a deck tech. I think I covered most of it. I guess I can say I think it's like really important to play 4 crews in the 75, as long as I guess Black-Red midrange is popular at least, or even aggro decks. Like I was saying, the main point of the deck is casting Delve spells. In some matchups, you don't really want Time Walk, so you can side out your Time Walks. But if you only have 3 Delve spells in your deck, the deck will function pretty badly, because if you don't cast Delve spells, the deck's pretty bad. So that's why it's important to have a Treasure Cruise in the sideboard. So let me see. Yeah, I basically talked about everything in the deck. I mean, there's Abrade Brotherhood's End. I just put Brotherhood's End because Convoke seemed kind of popular now, and it seemed like kind of a high upside. Abrade can be kind of nice, you know, against some decks. Like, some decks you want Brotherhood, like, have Hearse, but Brotherhood's End's not great against. Like, you know, this card's like, might look, it's kind of like, you know, not necessarily insane against Gruul. Maybe that's controversial. Some decks, it can be kind of like put you in awkward positions because it's hard to like, it's just like a card that can put you in awkward positions against some decks that have Hearse. I mean, I guess Greasefang would be the easiest answer. Like, a raid would be better against Greasefang. But I just wanted to like consolidate slots and just play 3 Brotherhood's End. And yeah, anyway, that is basically the deck tech.